Hi, everybody. Alan Arnett here with another podcast on the blog on alanarnett.com. It is Thursday, November the 21st, 2024, approaching Thanksgiving in the U.S. So early Thanksgiving to everybody. Hey, this is the last of my episodes on the seven summits. Today, we're going to talk about Mount Everest, and I'm thrilled to death to have two very special guests, Adrian Bollinger, the founder of Alpenglow, and Mike Hamill, the founder of Climbing the Seven Summits. We're going to talk to them after I do a very brief introduction here. But before I get into the mountain, just one quick thing about why I do what I do. As many people know that have been following me for years, is that my mom, Ida Arnett, Ida died from Alzheimer's disease. And when I went through the journey with her, I made her a vow that I was not going to let the world forget her. So I've been using my climbing as a way to raise awareness and to honor Ida for all these many, many years. So at the very end of this podcast, I'm going to run a short video that I created years ago, which really talks about my journey of climbing the seven summits all in 1 year back in 2011. And I hope you enjoyed that. But more importantly, I hope it moves you to make a donation to any Alzheimer's nonprofit that you want to. I recommend the Cure Alzheimer's Fund. 100% of all your donations goes to research, and they've done some absolutely marvelous breakthroughs in the industry. But there's many other out there as well, like the Alzheimer's Association and others. There's a chapter in almost every country around the world that you can make a donation to. So with that, that's why I do what I do. And I appreciate all of your support over the years. Mount Everest. Well, obviously, it's the highest in the world, and that makes it the highest of the seven summits. It stands on the border between China and Tibet. I'm sorry, Tibet and Nepal, and it's right at 29,032 feet. That makes it 8848.86 meters to be exact. The Chinese and the Nepalese, they collaborated a few years ago to actually remeasure it. And I'm just amazed that when they did the original measurement, that it was pretty close to what it is today. So I'm just really impressed with the technology back, whatever it was, 150 years ago. But anyway, it is up that Mount Everest continues to grow. It's growing by just a smidge every year, about as much as 0.021 inches, or there are 0.53 millimeters a year. And that's because the tectonic plates are moving north, and also something called a rebound effect with all the rivers that are merging together in the region. It's causing the ground to go lower, and that causes the mountains to rebound and go higher. So I don't understand that stuff. But nonetheless, it's a pretty interesting area, and obviously a beautiful area to go and visit, even if you're not going to go climb Mount Everest. But I'll tell you what, it's a light to bugs in terms of its attraction. It's almost insatiable. Thus far, through January of 2024, there has been 12,015 summits, a little over 12,000 summits. And that's been by about 5,900 foreigners with 6,100 support climbers, primarily Sherpas. In other words, more Sherpas have summited Everest than foreigners have, yet more foreigners, 200, have died than support climbers, 117. So it's a deadly mountain no matter how you want to look at it. However, it's not the most deadly when you look at it compared to some of the other mountains in the world out there. For example, Annapurna has a higher death rate, so does K2. Some of the lower ones are more like Choi Oyu. It's probably the safest of the 14 8,000 meter mountains. It's got a death rate of 0.4. Lhotse is also right there, a relatively safe mountain as well. K2 used to be a very deadly mountain at 1 in 4, 25% rate. But with the commercialization done over the last several years, mainly by the Nepali guide companies, that rate has really dropped, and it's now in the middle teens, maybe 14, 15% instead of 25% years ago. So back to Everest, looking at it historically, it was first attempted on the north side in 1922. They reached 27,300 feet before turning back. And of course, in the news even recently here is the 1924 British expedition of Mallory and Irvine. Mallory's body was found in 1999, and just this year they found a boot with Irvine's foot in it. And we're going to talk about that with Adrian and Mike a little bit here in just a second. Bottom line, though, is that the mystery of whether they summited or not still remains. Of course, the first true summit of Mount Everest was done by Tenzing Norgay and New Zealander Sir Edmund Hillary. They did it in 1953. They used basically the same route that's climbed today, the South Col route. Prior to that, it was attempted by two Swiss teams in the autumn of 1952. They almost got it. They reached 8,500 meters just above the South Col. It ends up that Tenzing Norgay was with them, and so that gave him a tremendous advantage of working with the British when they ended up climbing it and reaching the summit in 1953. If Mallory and Irvine did not make the summit, and I guess it's a round trip, so they obviously died on the way down. So as Ed Viester said in the last podcast, that the summit is optional, but the return is mandatory. So you have to give credit to Tibetan Nawang Gambu and a Chinese Chu Yin Hua and Wang Fu Sao, that they climbed it on May 25th in 1960. It was said that they climbed it. One of them climbed standing on the shoulders of another teammate in his sock feet on the second step. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So again, it's been, like 12,000 people have climbed it. The Nepal side is much more popular than the Tibetan side, mainly because there's not a lot of there's zero regulations on the Nepal side. And the Tibet side has often had many regulations. Plus, just logistically, it's more difficult to get into China than it is Nepal. But the Nepal's had around 8,400 people summit compared to 3,600. So 8,300 versus 3,600. So almost half or twice as much on the Nepal side. And just, people talk about climbing without oxygen all the time, climbing it in style. And while that's admirable, it ends up that only 224 people out of that 12,000 have actually summited without using supplemental oxygen. So that's about 2%. So, obviously it makes it much more harder. And the death rate is significantly higher to those people that are climbing without summits. Speaking of death, about 327 people have died. Again, 200 Westerners compared to 117 Sherpas have died from 1922 through 2024. That makes it about a 2.7% death rate. So kind of perversely, it's one of the safer mountains to climb in the world. I think Mont Blanc has a higher death rate than Everest does. But if you go back to last century, the death rate was in the 14%. But with the use of now commercial guides climbing the same route over and over again using very generous amounts of supplemental oxygen. Weather forecasts have dramatically improved using the same route year in, year out. Tents and clothing and all that technology has improved. That's brought the death rate dramatically down. Not to mention the support ratios of the Sherpas to foreigners. These days, it's not uncommon to have a 2-for-1. In other words, have two Sherpas supporting each climber, each foreigner. The overall average is right at 1.1 to 1.5. So 1.5 Sherpas for every foreigner that climbs it. Last year, there were 674 summits. And only 12 from Tibet, because Tibet was still closed essentially due to COVID. But last year, it was a lot of bureaucratic delays that caused it to open too late for anybody to really take a serious attempt at it. But nonetheless, 674 people did summit last year. And again, that was made up of 285 members, supported by 390 support climbers or Sherpas. So that's a 1 to 1.36. All but 3 of them did use supplemental oxygen. So kind of looking at the logistics to most people who go climb Everest will typically fly into Kathmandu, and on the Nepal side, then you fly onto Lukla and you begin a 10-day trek to Everest Base Camp. On the north side, a lot of people fly to Kathmandu and then take another flight to Lhasa or fly directly to Lhasa from their home city, wherever it is in the world. And then you take a multi-day drive to Everest Base Camp. I really love the trek to the Khumbu. You've heard me talk about that a million times, that if you ever get the chance to go trek in the Khumbu or the Annapurna circuit or the Manaslu circuit, especially the Manaslu circuit is fantastic. That it'll change your life forever. It'll change it for the better. Then the Tibet side, you're driving, and as a result, teams are able to bring in a lot more luxuries on that side, all the way from pool tables to one year one company brought in a sauna. And so there's no limit to the luxuries on that side. A little more difficult on the Nepal side, but nonetheless, it happens. I'm going to talk to Mike Hamill about that here in a minute, because he's really raised the bar on those on the luxuries that you get on Everest these days. Nepal just raised the permit price from $11,000 to $15,000 per person. So that's going to, well, we don't know what the impact that's going to have on the number of people. The guides are still mixed on exactly what that's going to have an impact on them. They're still seeing a very strong interest in climbing the mountain. So it's probably going to end up that $4,000 is not going to make a big difference for the demographic that goes to Everest these days. Tibet charges between around $16,000 to $18,000 for a team of 4 or more. So they don't sell individual permits, but that's no problem because people typically get together on a guided trip anyway. And so the lead organizer just pools everybody together. But that $18,000 really includes everything, including transportation from Lhasa, a couple of days to be a tourist in Lhasa, and then driving down to base camp. It includes yaks and trash fee and all sorts of stuff, including the rope fixing on the Nepal side, which is done by the Tibetans. Everybody knows that you typically climb Everest in the springtime, in April and May. The sweet spot is the summit between around May 17th to May 22nd is kind of a bell curve before that. The ropes typically will get in on both sides in early May, sometimes as early as late April, but mostly it's around between May 5th and May 10th. That opens the doors for people to jump up and go try to make their summit bids, but still most people end up in that late May timeline on both sides, May 18th through the 21st. In terms of climbing itself, today Everest has really become much more achievable. I'll never say easy about any 8,000 meter mountain because too many people have died. 26 people have died on Everest in the last 2 years. It's still a deadly, deadly endeavor to go on and something that should never be underestimated. If you ever read on the website that no experience is necessary, that they'll teach you everything you need to know about the mountain before you go, run, run, run. That's not a company that you want to risk your life with. But it still is a climb, especially on the Nepal side, slightly easier because there's less rock, there's a lot more snow. Objective dangers is really not that high frankly, on either side. You do have the risk of crevasses on the Nepal side, a slight risk of avalanches and rockfall, but it's very, very slight. Still, people used helmets the entire time. Most of the time, when rock comes kicking down, it's because somebody above you inadvertently knocked a rock and it fell down the slope, and it becomes a missile at that point. On the Tibet side, you are climbing a lot more of crampons on rock, on steep rock, especially on the slabs above the high camp and once you get to the ridge proper. And so you really have to have very strong legs, thighs, calves, and excellent cramponing skills to climb on that side. So most people consider the north side to be more difficult, mainly because of that technical aspect of it. It takes about anywhere from, these days, anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months to climb Everest. Some companies like Fruitenbach Associates and Alpenglow run these coveted rapid climbs or speed climbs, whatever you want to call it, where you pre-acclimatize at home using altitude tents. Then you arrive at your respective base camps. You may do an acclimatization rotation on a trekking peak, but most times they just spend one rotation heading up and make a summit bid out of it. And so as a result, the times can go, like I said, as short as 2 weeks, typically 3 weeks, but it's 100% dependent upon the weather. I'm going to talk to Adrian about that because he's really an expert in this area. Let's see, but most people use around 6 to 8 weeks. The general schedule is to arrive at base camp around tax day in the U.S., April 15th, and then summiting, or like I said earlier, around May 20th. You spend that interim time acclimatizing on the mountain. One of the arguments for doing these shorter times is that you don't spend as much time at base camp and climbing up and down the mountain, and thus you mitigate to some extent the risk of getting sick, catching some communicable disease there at base camp, or just frankly getting tired and bored. By shortening it up, you kind of reduce some of these risks. The downside of it is because you are doing it shorter, you are pre-acclimatizing that tent at home, sleeping under a altitude tent, or as I call it, a plastic bag for a month before you go. Not sure how that is for your partner in bed with you, but nonetheless, a lot of people do that, and frankly, they're very successful with it. I used to be a skeptic about using the altitude tents, but I've really come around because I've seen too many Summit Coach clients be successful with it. So let's go back to the route itself. On the Nepal side, you arrive at base camp, you go up to the Khumbu Icefall. That's what a lot of people are really afraid of these days. But if you look at the statistics of all the people that have died on the Nepal side, more people have died higher on the mountain than in the icefall. But that's of no solace to the 16 Sherpas who died in 2014 when a ice cliff released on the shoulder, Everest West shoulder, and fell into the icefall, taking the lives of 16 people. And that's where organizations like the Juniper Fund really comes into play of helping to support the family of those Sherpas who have died in the line of duty on the mountain. Again, if you'd like to support Sherpas and their families, the Juniper Fund is a great nonprofit that does wonderful work on that. It's Melissa Arnott and Dave Morton run that. They recently took over running the Khumbu Climbing Center. They're really just going to be more helping to get funding for it, because the Khumbu Climbing Center has, on the Nepal side, has really done a great job of training a lot of Sherpas, improving their overall mountaineering and guiding skills. So good on them for doing that. But we're talking about the icefall. It's still something that you want to get through as quickly as possible. I'll talk to Mike Hamill about the icefall here in a couple of minutes and get his take on what it's like these days. But once you get to the icefall, then you go through the Western Khum, and then you get to the up the Lhotse face. And the Lhotse face goes up to 7,000 meters to Camp 3. It used to be in the old days that you would go spend a night at Camp 3, a miserable night. These days, most people don't even bother to even tag it because they start using supplemental oxygen at Camp 2. Above Camp 3, you head up to the South Col, one of the highest camps in the world. The only higher is on Camp 4 on the Tibet side. It's very windy at that spot. It's the saddle. The Col is a saddle between Lhotse and Everest. Most teams just arrive there at mid-morning and leave around 9-10 o'clock at night to head up the summit. Some people will spend the night and the entire next day and go up the next day in order to get people to be rested up and fully ready to go for their summit push. In my opinion, you go from the South Col up to the balcony, up the triangular face. Typically, there's a lot of people on that. Almost any time, whether it's your own team or you're caught up in the conga line of other teams, you'll see just endless. It seems like an endless line of headlamps heading up to the balcony. And in my opinion, this next part between the balcony and the south summit is the crux of climbing on the Nepal side, the southeast ridge. You climb up that ridge, it gets really cold. Probably the sun has not come up yet, or if it does, it's just peeking up a little bit. Once you get a little bit higher on that, about 2/3 of the way up, you get on the windy side of Everest. Thus far, it's been blocked by the mountain, but now the winds pick up. It'll be 30 miles an hour, be maybe minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets cold, it's windy, you're tired, you're dehydrated, you're undernourished, you're exhausted, but you got to keep on going. And so you get to the south summit, and then you cross the Cornice Traverse, and then go across the Hillary Slope. It used to be very difficult to go across the Hillary Step, but after the 2015 earthquake, they really got redefined when the rocks kind of fell off from the earthquake, and now it's more of a snow slope. It's still deadly though. Last year, several people died when there was a collapse. There were way too many people on the Hillary Step, and it collapsed, taking several lives with it. So that just goes to show you that you've really got to be mindful about when you climb and going with operators that know how to avoid the crowds, and that is 100% possible. So from the Hillary Step, it's a relatively short walk with a couple of little undulating false summits, and then you reach the top of the world. On that side, at the summit, that's where the north side meets. So they kind of come up and meet together. I remember that when I summited, there were already people up there, and I couldn't figure out where they came from. But after a while, my oxygen deprivated brain figured out they had come up from the Tibetan side. So I'd look back on that, kind of laugh at myself. On the Tibetan side, again, you start in Lhasa, and then you drive down to base camp. Once you're in base camp, the base camp on the Tibetan side is not nearly as nice as what you have on the Nepal side, because but what you do have is one of the finest views of Mount Everest on the planet. You see the entire north face right there in front of you. You get to see the route, and it is absolutely stunning, stunningly beautiful. From the base camp, typically the program is you go to interim camp on their way to advanced base camp, where that really becomes your home. From advanced base camp, you go up to the North Col, a very windy area, really snow covered at that point. You climb up a well, relatively steep 30, 40, 50-degree angle snow slope that where you hit the North Col. Most teams will go and tag that. A few will actually spend the night there. They'll come back down to advanced base camp, maybe even base camp, waiting for that weather window. That's a period where the forecast calls for summit day of winds under 30 miles an hour. Once you get that okay, then you head back up to the North Col. And then this is really the real climbing begins. This is the real deal. People are using supplemental oxygen at this point. You go up to Camp 2 above the Camp 1 at the North Col, a very broad snow-covered ridge with the north and northeast faces flanking you on either side. It can be incredibly windy at this point. Once you leave Camp 2 at around 7,600 meters, it's really a rock plot higher until you reach Camp 3 at around 8,200 meters, where it gets steep. And then you'll arrive with the yellow band, same yellow band that's on the Nepal side, short section of limestone rock, maybe 400 feet, but you're on your summit push. And so you're pretty tired. Then you start to hit the ridge proper and you go across 3 steps. The first step is a short rock buttress. The second step at 8,000 meters is where the famous ladder is that was put in by the Chinese. There's actually a couple of ladders there. And technically it's not difficult, but it's so exposed. And I mean, you're just wagging in the breeze. And you don't want to, you're climbing a ladder with crampons. You are clipped into a fixed rope, but still you don't want to fall. You're going to waste energy doing that and worse. So you get across the second step. Actually, coming down the ladder is typically harder than most people than going up it. This can be a place where you will have queues or lines, stiles on the north side. As the north side gets more and more popular, you'll have more people climbing at the same time. And again, this is where the best guides in the world are able to manage that and where they're able to climb before or after the masses. Once you go past the second step, you go to the third step, and it's about 100 feet of a blocky rock, not nearly as technical as either the first or the second step, but you're at a high altitude now and you're heading to the summit. And from there, you head on up to the summit. Again, you stay on the summit only for a short time, no matter how you get up there. Maybe it could be as short as 5 minutes, but typically people spend probably half an hour, taking selfies, making sat phone calls. Actually, if you have China Telecom, you can get 5G signal from China on the summit. Supposedly, Incel was trying to get a cell phone signal to the summit from the Nepal side, but I'm not sure that's ever happened. Often you'll find GPS, the Garmin's and the spots, they'll get all confused. They don't know if you're in China or you're in Nepal, and often it'll send false readings out. So those at home following the little dot on their computer of their loved one up on top and it says they're in China, well, they probably are, depending upon if they're on one side or the other. By the way, you never stand on the tippy top of these mountains because a lot of indigenous people believe the mountain gods live on the summit of mountains, and especially on Everest. So the respectful thing to do is maybe a meter below, maybe 2 or 3 feet below the very tippy top, and honor the beliefs and honor the gods that live on the summit of these big old mountains. So we're gonna switch it over and bring in some special guests. And stay tuned at the very end for my short video presentation on my 7 summits in climbing for all-timers. Boy, I am so excited to have 2 guests today. I've had a couple of people over the last couple of podcasts, Dave Hahn a couple of weeks ago, Ed Viesturs and Garrett Madison last week. And this week is going to be the end of the 7 Summits podcast, as I said in the introduction. And I'm thrilled to death to have Mike Hamill, the founder of Climbing the 7 Summits. That's the name of a company, not a phrase. And Adrian Bollinger, the co-founder and founder of Alpenglow. Adrian, you're in Tahoe today?
I am. Yep. I'm in Lake Tahoe for a few days between a fun Yosemite season and some time planned down in Vegas rock climbing.
And are you in a climbing gym or an airplane hangar?
I'm in an airplane hangar that has 2 climbing walls. This is where we do a lot of our training, hoping to get a quick session in today.
I love it. So it's an and. Mike, you're in Truckee, recently relocated from beautiful Australia to California.
I am. Yeah, we moved up about a year and a half ago from Australia to Truckee, Tahoe, California as well. So, Here we are.
We're neighbors.
Yeah.
They are neighbors. And the other thing you have in common is that a couple of things. One is that, Mike, you've got a couple of young kids under the age of 4. And how old is the young one now, Adrian?
Arrow is turning 2 next week.
2. Oh my gosh, time's flying.
I know. Happening like that. Just
Yeah.
like everyone says.
And then the other thing I find really interesting, one of the reasons I wanted to have both of you on this podcast about Everest, is that you both came from pretty established companies. Adrian, you had started Alpenglow back in 2004. You worked with Himalayan experienced Russell Bryce for a number of years until you completely broke off. And then you really took Alpenglow and took it up to a whole new level. And Mike, you were the man with International Mountain Guides, IMG, running their custom programs for how many years? Long time.
Yeah, 15 years probably. I did 10 Everest expeditions with them, so quite
Yeah.
well.
And then in 2017, you created Climbing the Seven Summits after writing the book. I should have it here, Climbing the Seven Summits. He literally wrote the book. So, and what I find really interesting for our listeners is that what we have here are 2 examples of 2 different business models. Mike is, I could jokingly say, he offers the Swiss Army knife options of almost any way you want to climb Everest, except for solo, all the way from a Sherpa guided to the very high end with someone like a Tindi Sherpa or a custom one-on-one Western guide. And you'll have, what, 25 to 35 people on a team?
Yeah, typically 20 to 30, depending on the year. Yep.
Varies. While Adrian, you have really, at least at Everest, you both guide all around the world, but we're focusing on Everest on this one. But and Adrian, you kind of focused on strictly on the north side for reasons that we're going to get into. And I think anybody that's ever heard you and I talk, we've gone through this many, many times, and I think people will know what your what your feeling is on that, and completely great. But you focus on the north side, and you focus on rapid ascents of several weeks instead of a couple of months. High use of altitude tends to pre-acclimatize. High guide IFMGA guide ratio, relatively small teams of what, 5 to 10?
That's right. 5 to 10. Yep.
Something like
Exactly right.
Yeah. So, and what I find just really fantastic is that along with many other companies out there, from the Madison Mountaineerings to the Fruitenbach Adventures to many Nepali companies, that you all have carved out your various niches, and you're all really successful. But you two really are kind of a case study for a couple of different business models. So let's get into it, talking about climbing Mount Everest. And first thing is that are you seeing any decline in the interest? I mean, there's the press loves to cover Everest when something bad happens. They never talk about the person that grew up reading National Geographic and dreamed of it and finally accomplished their dream and stood on the summit. That's not news. If it bleeds, it leads. So are you guys, what's your kind of your take on the kind of the state of Everest at the moment? Is there interest going up, going down, about the same? Adrian, you first. What do you think?
Sure. I think the interest in Everest is still really strong. I see it perhaps shifting a little bit. People have more questions about kind of the ethics of it, and is it still fun, and is it still cool, and is it still hard? I do get more of those questions, but I still see so much interest. So many people starting in Ecuador or Peru or Bolivia with us. Their dream is to get to that highest point one day. So I think it's changing, but it's still very strong.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'd agree for sure, especially coming out of COVID. I think people reprioritized. They wanted to spend their money on experiences, get back out there and travel. So we've definitely seen an increase in interest. I think there's maybe a bit of a recorrection now, a few years on, but definitely the desire is there. I think where people are spending their dollars is maybe changing a little bit, but there's definitely strong interest still in climbing Mount Everest.
So, Mike, you have a couple of interesting policies. Um, One, I love it. It's on your website, so I'm not taking this out of
It is.
context.
Yeah.
It actually says no dickhead policy. What does that mean?
It basically just comes down to wanting to climb with good people, and there's nowhere that it's more important than on Mount Everest. When you're on a 2-month expedition, you really have to like the people you're climbing with. You have to kind of see eye to eye with them, share a similar philosophy. So we really do vet our clients, not just for their climbing resume, but for their personality. And, some people that just don't fit kind of what we're looking for. And we're happy to take less people and make it a better experience for everyone. The few times we've had kind of cancers in the team, people that we maybe didn't vet out, it ends up impacting everyone on the
Yeah.
team, and it's just not worth it. We'd rather have a good time as I get older. I want to have a good time and climb with good people, and it's so important to having a successful kind of good experience,
You
especially on.
talk, yeah, we talk about the climbing resume. Do you have cut and hardcore guidelines or rules about the mountains or experienced people have to have before you'll accept them? And then I'll ask you the same question, Adrian.
We don't. It's really kind of person to person with us. We know everyone that comes to climb with us. We look at their resume. There's some people that may climb in Ecuador with us, and Vincent, Denali, that don't necessarily hit like a height requirement, that are super, super competent, and we know that they're going to do well on a team over there. So it's not hard and fast requirements, but it's more getting to know the individual and kind of knowing that they have a good chance of being successful and that they're competent and can take care of themselves.
So, AB, if I came to you with only Aconcagua and Denali, would you take me?
I
You got
wouldn't take it.
definitely
No,
would.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. For Adrian.
I think he said he wouldn't take me under any circumstance, but go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think Mike and I have probably a lot of similarities in this, and I love that you mentioned as you get older, it's like, I mean, team makeup is so important, like camaraderie and fun, and we always focus on like each person being a competent team member. That's what we always tell people, and that can mean different things. It's got a lot to do with experience. It's also got to do with kind of like having spent time in the mountains and made mistakes and failed, and kind of understanding how that all works to be truly competent when you're up there. So that's what we look for. We actually are, for the very first year, getting a little more gray in our in how we choose our team. So up until this year, we've always said to join our group team, you need 3 to 5 6,000-meter peaks, 1 7,000-meter peak, and 1 8,000-meter peak. We are now considering some alternatives to the 8,000-meter peak requirement. For a number of years, we haven't required it on privates, and we've had good success, like I'm sure a lot of the companies have noticed. And the edge cases are what kind of got us to this point where it's like, well, what if someone's been climbing for a decade in Alaska and doing their own trips to South America, and then just because they haven't ticked this specific box? So maybe I'm getting softer in my older age as well, but I think there are certainly places to analyze an individual's resume, and that's what we're doing a little bit more this year. But we're still really pushing that idea of competence before you head to that mountain.
I see a lot of websites by companies that say no experience required. We'll teach you everything you need to know on the mountain, and that seems to be a bar too low.
Oh, yeah, really. I think I just saw an Explorers Web article where, Angela Benavides found some companies saying if you climb to Via Ferrata, you can climb Ama de Blam. And it kind of just hurts my heart, right? Like just someone at that level, while they might be able to get up the mountain on a perfect Bluebird day, are they going to understand the risks they're taking while they do that? And if the shit hits the fan, which it sometimes still does, are they going to be able to assist a team instead of being an anchor on a team? So experience is still so important to me.
Absolutely. And it's not a joke. You see it too. There are plenty of people that, their first time through the ice fall is kind of their first time putting on crampons, or they're working out the kinks on low boucher or something like that. So, it's not just an advertisement. We definitely see it over there, which is pretty unfortunate, because time and time again, those are the people that get into trouble up high.
And sadly, not sadly, I guess maybe it is sadly, but we're seeing the number of people go up every year on Everest. COVID notwithstanding, if you look at the trend lines and take out the bad years like 2015 and 14 and the COVID years, there's still a trend line going up. And the number of deaths also has recently ticked up. In the last 2 years, we've had 26 deaths on Everest, 18 2 years ago and 8 this year. 26 and 23 of those were with companies that often say no experience necessary. So, Mike, I think
Hmm.
you're spot on in that observation that,
Yeah.
and I think that's what gives the mountain a bad name. And Adrian, I think that's what people are when they come to you and say, "I'm totally confused." I don't want to stand in that style that I see, from that 2019 picture. And so,
That's right. And I think also like maybe a way to sort of twist it and explain it as well is like I just truly believe, and we've seen over and over and over again, the individual is going to like enjoy their experience much more, and they're also going to like take so much more home from that experience if they've actually worked through some of these steps
yeah,
to, I'm going to say, belonging there. And that's not gatekeeping, but it's like being able to be additive to a team and help Sherpa or help your guys or just help your teammate who's having a rough day, because every day shifts who's having a good day and a bad day, right? Like the experience, I believe, is much more powerful. So that's often how I try to sell it to my potential clients. Like, hey, take one more year, do this, and believe me, it's going to be better.
yeah. I get accused of being trying to have a club here, but I used a phrase that I think you need to earn the right rather than buy the right to go to Everest, and that comes with that whole
Mm-hmm.
experience CV that people really need in order to enjoy the experience. Honestly, I think it cost me too much money, but I think by going something on my fourth time, I really appreciated it much more. So I would have appreciated it the third time, maybe the second too. Anyway, so okay, we've got Mr. North, we've got Mr. South right now. Without turning this into a point counterpoint Harvard Business School debate, let's talk about the differences in the sides. And so one of the main differences, obviously, is the ice fall. And so, Mike, I want to start with you, and then Adrian will come back over in a second, and talk about how do you mitigate the true risk of going through the ice fall. And by the way, more people have died elsewhere on Everest than in the ice fall. But that does not take away from the 16 Sherpas who died in 2014, the 3 that died a couple of years ago. So it's still a deadly area. So, Mike, how do you
Yeah.
mitigate? How do you rationalize that risk of taking your staff, the Sherpas, and your clients through the ice fall year after year?
Yeah, I mean it's obviously a dangerous area. There are, the basic things like, we do a rotation over on Lobuche. We either do one or two long rotations up the mountain to kind of minimize the trips through the ice fall, the time we spend in there. But like you say, Alan, there are other places where we're more worried about, like Summit Day. But I think one thing that I wanted to point out is I really feel like the ice fall is a different place than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Whether it's the warming temperatures, I think the Khumbu ice fall is a lot thinner. It's a lot more settled. We might get 5 to 10 ladders from base camp to Camp One nowadays, whereas my first year in 2005, we probably had 120,
Oh,
30 ladders. We'd have the 3 or 4 ladders all lashed together that you're bouncing up on
yeah.
a 45-degree angle, and we just don't see that anymore. So I think it's a lot more settled, it's safer in that regard, and we just don't see as much hanging over the ice fall off the west shoulder these days as we used to do. So it's never going to be safe. It's not a safe place. We try and move through it quickly. You can move through it faster now, but I think it's safer than it used to be. It's safer than it ever was. The times are shorter from base camp to Camp One. So I think that's a positive, but that risk is always going to be there. But like I say, I'm more concerned about the risk on Summit Day, having the redundancies there, being able to get people down if we need to, because I think that's where the most things tend to go sideways. So
Do you think there'll ever be that alternate route on Noopsy to the climber's right as you're going up the ice
I don't
fall?
think so. I saw them over there trying to put that one in a couple years ago, and it didn't really seem to stick. And you actually have more hanging over the route on that side. It's super loose and broken, and you see that come down a couple times every year. So I don't see that as being less risky. I see it as being more risky, kind of hugging that
Yeah.
shoulder over there on Nupsy. So I don't think that'll stick. I think kind of going up the gut, staying away from the west shoulder, staying away from Nupsy, and just, finding that direct route with not too many ladders. I know they had a couple stop starts last year, and then they finally found a good route that was fast and didn't have many ladders, and everyone felt pretty comfortable with it.
So we'll come back and talk more about the Nepal side, especially I want to talk about the Hillary Step slope and how it collapsed this past year. But so Adrian, you've chosen to mitigate the ice fall by simply not going there. Tell our
Sure,
audience,
that's
our
right.
listeners, what's the background behind that and kind of how you feel about it.
Yeah, like you said, we've talked quite a bit about this. I will just throw out, like, it's great to hear Mike saying that the route is settling down. I think Alan, like, I would love to return to the South Side one day. I mean, and of course, my dream, like probably quite a few companies, is one day to have traverses between North and South, which only works if we have a South Side operation as well, and a safe South Side operation. So it is my belief that there can be mitigation or changes made, whether through nature or climate change or humans. We can hopefully, like, I can imagine a time when that side is within my risk management kind of like framework again. But for me, what I found, like, kind of, Mike, what you said, like, I agree completely. The risks up high, and Alan, you saying that like so many people have been killed up there, and that's certainly true. Those risks, from my brain, always felt like manageable if we use appropriate mountain guiding techniques and expedition leadership. While we cannot remove the risk completely, there are often risks we can manage, like running out of oxygen, exhaustion, high altitude illnesses. Those are things that a good team is really most of the time going to be able to manage.
Yeah.
Same thing with rope work, crevasse falls, things like that. My feeling in the ice fall after 38 trips through it, I spent 2008 to 2014 on the south side of the mountain. My feel of the ice fall was there was a randomization to the risk. And the only way you can make it safer is to go faster or reduce trips. And even when we kind of pioneered this idea with Russell of like climbing Lobuche and reducing trips through the ice fall and things like that, there was still enough trips where I was seeing fatalities with Sherpa and having close calls with my clients. And so I just made my calculation was, if I can remove that risk and still run a trip I'm proud of with all the other challenges of the north side, why wouldn't I do it?
Yeah, yeah. What are the well, in addition to the ice fall, as we move up to both sides of the mountain. So on the north side, you have advanced base camp, and then you go to the North Col, and you typically only take one rotation there, right? And spend maybe a night there, and then you come back down and wait for the weather window. And we'll get to the rapid ascent aspect of that in a second.
Yeah.
Whereas Mike,
yeah. So go on. So I was going to say, yeah. So the way the camps kind of even out, which a lot of people maybe don't realize, I think you've done some great stuff on this, Alan, is like base camps are similar.
Right.
Camp 2 on the south side is the same as advanced base camp on the north side. So we might have a more comfortable spot where yaks can get to, and we can have a lot of our infrastructure there, but it's the same altitude. And then the North Col is the same as Camp 3 on the south side. So we either tag or sleep there, depending on my old school self, wants everyone to sleep at above 7,000 meters still without oxygen during acclimatization. But there's plenty of impetus or push from my co-guides that maybe a tag of that camp is appropriate without oxygen. But so that's kind of how I see the two sides lining up and how we use our camps.
So as a result, the north side is actually a little bit shorter in duration of physically climbing, irrespective of acclimatization rotations, because you're starting from higher camps. And Summit Night is shorter on the north side.
Summit Night is certainly shorter on the north side, but the other camps, I guess, more or less align. I think, like, we have more distance getting from base camp to ABC. We use an interim camp. Maybe that's a little like Camp 1 on the south side. But yeah, and we do a similar thing. We do one rotation usually, sometimes two, to that like North Col, 7,000 meters.
Yeah, yeah. So Mike, on the Nepal side, a couple of questions here. One is that one of the criticism I'm hearing a lot these days is that advanced base camp, or Camp 2, right at the base of the Lhotse face, it's just gotten just kind of out of control with the luxuries. I mean, you've got stoves and saunas and pool tables. No, not really. But you have a lot of luxuries that are very similar to what you have down at base camp. And the only way to get that up there is on the back of human beings. Do you think that's kind of gotten a little bit out of control? I mean, on Denali, you don't have that. Why should climbers expect to have those luxuries at advanced base camp? I understand base camp, and we're going to talk about that style in a second. But
Yeah.
at Camp 2, really?
Yeah, I think that's maybe been blown out a little bit. You know,
Okay.
we're one of the kind of higher end in terms of luxury operators on the mountain, and our Camp 2 is still fairly basic. Yeah, we do bring up some basic chairs and tables, but that's really kind of the biggest comfort other
Good.
than, a kitchen tent for the guys to cook in. And we cache a lot of that stuff up there from year to year, so it doesn't need to get carried up
Mm.
and down. It's really just the food that we'd be carrying up there anyway.
Anyway,
So
yeah.
I don't see there as being too many luxuries up there. Our dining tent is still just a simple Nepali kind of double layered insulated dining tent. It's not like some elaborate dome or anything like that. So I think it's still fairly basic. It's more at base camp where those luxuries come into play.
So this is kind of a trick question, but I'm assuming that you take into account the loads on the Sherpas and the number of trips and just the wear and tear and the objective risk of sending them through the icefall carrying.
Absolutely. That's always a calculation. And it was really cool to see this last year. The reasoning behind it was because we were later in the season, but to see the government allowing us to transport some of those ropes, the fixing gear up on helicopter, I'm all for that, minimizing the trips for the Sherpa through the ice fall. And I think we'll start seeing more of that. You may be aware that they were test flying the drone last year. They were carrying some supplies up with that. It's kind of annoying to have that flying over your head at base camp, but if we can start moving gear up that way, keeping people safer, I'm all for it. And I think there'll be a lot more of that in the future, and you're not risking pilots either flying those drones.
This is a little dated, but I remember talking to Russell Bryce a few years ago, and he was speculating that not the ice fall, but the Western Coombe would become impassable due to the width and the depth of the crevasses. And that naturally leads to the question: does the south side become unclimbable totally, or do now you begin to use helicopters to fly people to what today is Camp 2, and then does that become a redefinition of climbing on the Nepal side?
Again, we're seeing what we're seeing in the Khumbu. This year it was straight and fast from Camp 1 to Camp 2. Clients were making it up there in 2 hours. So I think the opposite is happening. It's settling. The crevasses are maybe filling in. You don't need to sneak as wide to Nuptse, so you're not as exposed to avalanches or rockfall. And it's just straight and direct and a safer route. So I think the opposite is actually happening.
That's great to hear. So let's go ahead.
Raising my hand, trying to be polite.
Mr. Bollinger,
No,
yes.
I just wanted to add that I think people might not assume this, but I so strongly agree with what Mike said about helicopters and drones, and like the wilderness experience in the mountains is something that I cherish so deeply, and it's one of the reasons I live in California. Is this just huge depth of wilderness we have, where those things are very rare. But when I think about Everest, I think of it more in an Alps style model with the amount of climbing and the risk of climbing that happens there. And helicopters have made that dramatically safer in the Alps. And in Nepal, despite there being issues, and I think we probably need more ATC and tower control and safeties in place and less competition between companies. There's lots of things like that, but I see helicopters as just an essential part of making that side of the mountain more safe. I also feel the same way about the north side. Like we're starting to do test flights, starting to look at rescues with the Chinese, and now flying above ABC. And like this is a very important step for this industry, I think.
When will the Chinese allow helicopters to do rescues on the north side?
They're already now offering, As of 2019 was the first time we were offered a helicopter rescue, actually for a member on the National Geographic team that was looking for Sandy Irvine. It actually didn't make sense because of his illness and the hospital that they were offering to take him to and things like that. So we did it the old school way of keep to the border and helicopter to CWAC. But they now every year flying lots of test flights, and they've built already a new helicopter base in Tingri so the helis don't have to be coming from Shigatse so far away with fuel and things like that. That's not exactly an answer to your question. In the next 3 years, we will certainly have helicopter rescue.
Has that museum finally been built, or is it still under construction?
Built but not opened. I think COVID really slowed a lot of that down, but the excitement around it is still really strong from the CTMA.
Because I understand it. I mean, it's the size of 14 super Walmarts, and they're going to offer, skiing and heli-skiing and
Yeah.
flight skiing and all sorts of outdoor adventure sports based around. They're really going to further monetize and touristize. Is that a word? Everest,
Yeah.
your side of Everest.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens there. I mean, there's been some real positives with that, right? Like they initially built a hotel all the way at Everest Base Camp at 17.2, right at the end of the road. And then through conversations and I think their desire for the national park to be a national park, they actually abandoned that building and are now doing all this building down in Tingri and encouraging people to go for day trips and to go back. They're really moving the tourism away from the mountain while allowing the climbing at the mountain. So I think it's an interesting process. They're not going to get it all right. It's not all good. I'm not trying to like sugarcoat things, but they're imagining they have a Grand Canyon or a Yellowstone or a Yosemite where millions of people a year will want to visit, just like all national parks do. And they're trying to figure out how to encourage that because it's one of the most incredible places on the planet while not destroying it. And they certainly are not getting it all right, but I think their hearts and heads are in the right place as they go through that.
Let's use that as a segue to talk about how Nepal and I'm going to come back to the routes, especially the top part of the routes. I want to talk about the second step. I want to talk about the Hillary Slope, but let's talk about how the respective countries manage their side of the mountain. Nepal really is kind of the wild, wild west still. Is if you've got money, you can climb. Not a lot of rules, not a lot of requirements. Whereas China seems like, especially like over the last 4 years, it was closed. And I guess the word was that they went and removed a lot of the trash and they kind of moved some bodies out of sight. They got Mallory's camera and they did a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm kidding. That's a joke, folks. I'm joking on that. We don't know
That's
where
the
camera
viral
is.
moment of the podcast. Alan
Exactly.
knows where the camera is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, me and my dog. So, but China has really, I think, done a pretty good job because they have quotas now on how many people they'll issue permits to. They've got these requirements like you have to have come or climbed a 7,000-meter mountain before you can get an Everest permit. Ostensibly, you're supposed to use oxygen above 8,000 meters, but we saw this year on Shish that was totally ignored. But nonetheless, China compared to Nepal. Mike, how do you feel that Nepal is doing with without burning any bridges? I know they're doing great, but what areas would you like to see them improve in?
I mean, I think they're moving in the right direction. They're moving a lot slower than China from what I hear is going on over there. But I think they're moving in the right direction. The past couple of years, 3, 4 years, they've had this government-sponsored military cleanup expedition where they have a lot of manpower dragging tons and tons of trash off the mountain. There's that presence there. The liaison officers are actually serious about that, enforcing the garbage deposit and making sure you bring all your trash off the mountain. So I think they're moving in the right direction for sure, but I think they need to do a lot more. And I think I was reading somewhere, Adrian, you mentioned like kind of vetting the companies that operated on the north side. I think you gotta vet. You can vet your clients, but you can vet the companies as well and make sure they're operating to a standard. They're bringing their trash down. They're vetting their clients. They're making sure they're safe. They're not advertising it as like a Kilimanjaro. So I think they're doing a better job, but there's a long way to go for sure. Because you're still seeing the photos of the trash at the South Col. It's still an issue.
Yeah. How about how China's managing?
And yeah, I would say Interestingly, again, I think it's really important to try to be like as open and honest as we can, despite having our preferences of sides. And like, there is still absolutely a trash issue in China, specifically at 8,300 meters. So they've done a really good job lower, where their, Chinese officials are going to and kind of enforcing things. And it goes beyond 7,000 meters. So they're doing a good job, but then we still arrive at 8.3, and it's an embarrassment, and we're putting our tents on top of stacks of 6 other tents that have been left there. And so they also still have a ways to go. But what I do think they're doing a good job, they kind of culled some companies back in 18 and 19 before COVID and haven't allowed them back in for various violations, from allowing an illegal traverse to having too many Sherpa injuries, to not following even trash regulations at ABC. And so we saw them do that, and they've made it very clear to us that there is consequences. So, for instance, the 7,000 meter requirement of clients going to Everest, it would be, people have asked, like, why not just fake a certificate? And it's like, the client might get away with that, but the company is absolutely being upheld that if that happens, there will be consequences. And so I think, again, they're on the right track. They're trying. So the other thing we struggle with is sometimes it's quite a bit of a black box. I think the no oxygen rule is an example of that. Like, I can certainly tell you that my company never received any paperwork or requests not to climb without oxygen this season. So it seems like some companies got something and some didn't. We don't know why. If there was a rule, Sherpa always climb above 7,000 meters without oxygen. It's more common on Everest, at least on our side, for people to put on oxygen at like 73, 75. And so it's an example of where I think we could still do a lot better with transparent communications on our side.
Do you guys think that Everest will ever get to the point like Denali, where you have a limited number of concessions that authorized guides? Denali has 6 or 7, I think, by the National Park Service. You can still go independent, but if you want to go with a commercial guide, you've got to go with one of those 7. You think that'll ever happen on either side, or are they too complicated and bureaucratic?
I mean, I think the climbing industry is so insignificant for the Chinese government that Nepal really wants the dollars and needs the dollars. So I don't see that happening on the Nepalese side, but maybe on the north side, because it's just such a small fraction of the entire economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they will be. They're so focused on this mountain being like a pristine and sacred thing that tourists who come to the national park want to see. I think they will continue with quite tight regulations. I think maybe a model is more like the Argentina model, where there's a limited number of logistics operators that are local Argentinian companies. Like, all the guide companies from around the world can still go, but they have to work through one of those few. I think ALE and Vincent is the ultimate example of that. Of course, it's a frustrating monopoly in some ways, but it's the most pristine mountain on the planet because there's one company responsible and everyone has to go through them. And I could imagine that, like, there's 8 or 10 or 12 kind of operators in Nepal who have met those standards. And it is suddenly easier for a government to manage a few companies than everyone.
I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a consolidation just from a natural evolution of business. I mean, forget about mountaineering, but you have, I don't know how many cruise lines there were 50 years ago, but I suspect there's less today. Same thing with airlines. It seems like that's a natural. It used to be in business, it was the rule of 3, that all businesses eventually came down to 3 giant companies that basically dominated the market. And I can easily see on the Nepal side maybe having 5 or 6 Nepali companies and 2 or 3 Western companies, and something smaller, maybe half that amount on the north side. But the Nepali companies have been very interesting. I've been looking at statistics for years, and roughly 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 80% of the people who went to the summit of Everest were guided by an IMG, an AAI, a Himalayan Experience, et cetera, Venture Consultants. Today, it's Asian Trekking and 7 Summits, Treks, Elite, Imagine, 8K. They now represent 80% on the Nepal side. So it's completely shifted. And what's been going on is that it goes back to the business model. They've been competing on price. So they're kind of going for the quantity, whereas the Western operators now have your prices have gone up. And now you're competing more on the maybe a service level. It's kind of like an airplane. You can ride in the back or the front. It's a different experience all the way around. You're going to pay for it. Mike, you're kind of again, you're the Swiss Army knife. And I want to use this as a segue of talking about styles. And Mike, you've kind of you've gone the way of luxury and adding a lot of creature comforts to your base camp, ensuite private tents with beds off the ground. And last year, I think you got a lot of grief for having a masseuse there. But then again, I have to go back to Russ. He had the pleasure dome and the cappuccino and a glass of wine. And
absolutely.
So, Mike, I don't think you've invented something, but I have to give you kudos for taking it up a notch. What's going on there?
Yeah, I think you and I are probably similar, Alan. We're kind of old school. We like to suffer. I still sleep in a tent. I like to sleep in my crappy little camping tent and get the full mountain experience. But yeah, we don't want to dictate to the client what experience they want to have. So we started offering these things because people were asking for them, and everyone responded really well. And the more we offered them, the more people chose those options. And like you say, we're the Swiss Army knife. We have plenty of people. Half our team are right there with me in the camping tents, but the other half are in these kind of more luxury accommodations and whatnot. And we got the barista and the big dome and all that. That's nothing new, but I think the industry dictates where you go, and you can either listen to that or you disappear, right? And the companies that aren't listening to that are disappearing, and even the local companies that are improving their service, offering some of these luxuries, are outcompeting the other local companies who aren't. So we're just trying to listen to the clients. That's all we've done. We've tried to customize our program to what our clients want and not dictate to them. So even in terms of schedule or the amount of oxygen, whatever it might be, we're a la carte. We want to customize and give people a good experience across the board. And that's a lot harder for us. It's a lot more logistics, but we're happy to do that if it gives a better experience for our clientele. So
and clearly there's a market for it. I mean, you're selling out those high-end packages every single year now. So I mean, and I know the Nepali government's kind of got their nose kind of out of whack on it. Last year they tried to put in some bans on different things. They did it at the last minute, but still, I mean, as you say, it's the market. If you don't respond to the market, you're gonna go away. And similarly, Adrian, I mean, your rapid ascents, the use of extensive use of pre-acclimatization, that's another area that the market has really said, yeah, we like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've focused quite a bit of energy on this idea of can we cut out some of the downtime or grind of an expedition while still keeping the essential trueness of the experience, I guess is what we're looking for. And you've heard my spiel before. This started with me completely selfishly living just like I'm sure Mike has for many years, 8 months a year in a yellow tent on the side of a mountain, trying to run my business on a satellite phone and being like, I'm never going to have a family. I'm never going to have any friends. My business is never going to grow. So selfishly, I started trying to figure out, even though drinking whiskey with Russell and playing cards was really fun, all the ways to reduce the number of days doing that. And by pre-acclimatizing and then combining that pre-acclimatization with absolutely fantastic dialed logistics, because it doesn't matter how acclimatized someone is if the helicopter doesn't fly and the Jeep breaks down and the tents all suck up high and they can't sit through a storm and things like that. So combining those two things, we were able to kind of reduce the amount of time on mountains. And what we found as we experimented with this in the 2010s was we were actually improving on our success ratio. So success was actually raising, safety was maintaining. And I think there are those corollary benefits of people no, there's less amount. If the trip's 30 days instead of 60 days, then there's less time that people have to go home because something happens at work, something happens with their family, they have a dental emergency, they just get sick of the food. All those different things are reduced. And so overall success improves. And we've just kind of leaned in. One thing we experimented with, and we've seen some companies experiment with, is like mixing rapid ascent and normal pace clients. And we've seen kind of the tension between that. If you've been on the mountain suffering for 3-4 weeks, and then these hot shots parachute in and like, I'm going to do it in half the time, it kind of sucks. And so we were just like, we're going to keep our team small and everyone's going to do it this way. We do not offer traditional length expeditions to 8,000-meter peaks anymore.
What's interesting about that is that what I've also seen is that you have those two models, but then the weather is the wild card, and all of a sudden now you get a 2-week delay, and so the rapid ascent people are they basically on the same schedule as the traditional people, and so all of a sudden you spent more money. You spent 2 months in an altitude tent, and you lost your partner at home, and so but you're on the same schedule as the traditional team. So, I mean, I often say these days, and I think I've heard you, Adrian, take me to task for it indirectly when I say that climbing Everest has now become attainable and not as much of a challenge as it once was. And I say that in inverted commas, that it's still incredibly hard, but it's certainly more attainable than it was 20 years ago through the use of better technology for clothing, weather forecasting, oxygen delivery systems, using the same exact route year after year. So the risk or the unknowns have really come down. And I want to use that as a segue to say, how can we make this mountain safer on both sides? 26 people died. I just want the listeners, if they're still with us,
wow.
And we're going to wrap up here in about 5 minutes, but how in the world can we justify having 26 people, families, lose somebody on Everest? How can we make the mountain safer?
I mean, I'll throw out my flip answer, which is have more people climb on the north side. If you actually look at the numbers on the north side in the modern era of guiding, not just overall numbers, because that's not fair because there's so many more climbers on the south side. But if you actually look at percentages, it is incredibly rare when we have fatalities on the north side. Clients, and even more rare for workers. And that's the single thing that I felt was most important, was I want to increase worker safety. So reduce fatalities. It's just a much safer route. We climb ridges instead of in valleys, which means when things like avalanches, icefall, and rockfall fall off, they're less likely to hit us. And because of the reduced number of people and increased safety requirements, we have fewer, heroic potential rescues from workers up high, which puts everyone at risk. So that's my flip quick answer. And then beyond that, I think, just encouraging to communicate what the risks are, encouraging experience, and I think continue to provide great examples like Mike does, like I believe we do, to the industry of what best practices are, and encourage the newer players in the sport and the budget players to meet those best standards.
Mike,
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of it comes down to the individual climbers. They need to do their research and understand what they're getting. I think so many people just see that price tag and they don't realize that some of these local companies are logistics providers. They're not guide services. And they get over there and they're paired with a Sherpa that doesn't have any experience, and they're just totally out of their element. They're expecting a guided experience like they got in Europe or the States or South America, and they don't get that because they see the shiny $30,000 price tag or whatever. So I think people doing their due diligence and really understanding the product they're getting is so important. But I think if there was some way the government could vet the guiding companies a little bit better. I think if you look at the reputable companies, whether they're Western or Nepali, they share a similar philosophy. They share a similar safety record. It can be done safely. It's the companies that don't have those redundancies. They haven't invested in the safety. They don't share that philosophy. And some of the local companies are very upfront about the fact that they don't have any obligation to your safety. If you get into a rescue scenario, that's not their job to save you. And that is not our philosophy. And that's not Adrian's philosophy. And I think whether on the north or the south, research your company, see what their philosophy is, see how they invest in safety and redundancies and all of that, and you're probably going to be fine. You know, at Everest, at the end of the day, is a dangerous place, but there are a lot of ways you can mitigate that risk.
So we're going to wrap up here. And the last question for both of you. If you look at the trends, let's say 10, 12 years ago, people under 35, maybe even under 30, were the dominant age bracket, the demographic. Today, the sweet spot is late 30s, early 40s. So we've seen a graying of people going to Everest. Part of that, honestly, has got to be due to it's just the prices have gone up. And so, and then, a lot of young people today, they've got student loans. They simply can't afford to go spend even 30,000, much less 100,000 or 75,000 on Everest. But if we don't bring younger people into the sport, it's gonna slowly just go away. So what do you think we can do to attract younger people into the sport of mountaineering? Not necessarily Everest, but in general. And is there a time for kind of a youth programs and for the major guides around the world to create, some incentives for young people to get into mountaineering through mentorship programs and things like Big City Mountaineers? I know it's inner city, but broader thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say, it's interesting you say that, Alan, because I always tell people the opposite. Like 10, 20 years ago, I felt like the average age was older. There are people that had made their money professionally, and then they're taking this next step to start climbing bigger peaks. Whereas now we see so many young professionals, whether they're from the Bay or New York, they've reprioritized what their goals are. They're making good money. And our average age has come down. I feel, I haven't done any research on it, but it seems like we get more and more young people every year. But outside of climbing Mount Everest, I think, yeah, some of that mentorship, some of the scholarships that they're offering, whether through the AAC or other nonprofits, that's a good place to start. But even like, rock gyms or climbing schools, I think getting people out there in a cost-effective way, like we were doing our Australian Alpine Academy, $1,000 or whatever. It's a very approachable way to get into the sport if you're younger and don't have a lot of disposable income. So some
It's a
more
great program.
programs like that.
That's right.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I'd agree. Number one, anecdotally, our clientele is getting younger, not older on Everest. Absolutely. I don't know if the Himalayan database shows something different, but
It does. Yeah.
okay, yeah, and I don't know if it's being pulled down by workers, younger and younger Sherpa and support staff, because that does surprise me. But so yeah, I hope we can continue to encourage younger people and people at different points in their lives to find ways to prioritize climbing and mountaineering. A couple of moments I've had in my past few weeks to make me feel like climbing is very much alive and well for the next generation. I was just spent a few weeks in Yosemite and like hanging out in Camp 4 where all the dirt bags are, right? Like I'm now in my Sprinter van in the Upper Pines. I booked 6 months ago because I got a family and a 2-year-old and a dog and an au pair and all this. But like hanging in Camp 4 bouldering, there are just so many stoked young people like having those experiences that I remember 2 decades ago and trying to figure out how they're going to eat that night, but all they actually care about is what they're climbing the next day. And then I went to the American Mountain Guides Association annual meeting in Boulder, where 15 new guides were pinned full IFMGA, the biggest number ever in a single year.
Nice.
And the energy and stoke and belief that this is an amazing profession and there's so many opportunities in it was really, really strong. So my belief the sport is really alive and well in that next generation. And we just need to continue offering opportunities where we can, showing that both professionally and for fun recreationally, these are just great, incredible, important experiences to have.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm glad to hear both of your companies are seeing a youth surge. The data that I'm looking at is coming from the Himalayan databases and aggregate data across all guides, across all markets, and there's definitely a trend line showing that Everest itself is aging, and I think that's driven primarily by the low cost companies offering Everest for 30,000 instead of 75, and that's attracting people that can afford 30. They can't attract that. but there's problems, with that, with the lack of experience and a lot of the other things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I appreciate your time and your wisdom, and I wish you both continued success.
Cool. Thanks,
I
Alan.
really enjoyed it. Thanks,
Appreciate
Alan.
it.
See you soon, Mike.
Yeah, we'll see ya.
See you on slopes.
Hi, I'm Alan Arnett, and I'm raising $1 million for Alzheimer's research. Right now I'm standing on top of a Colorado 14 or Capitol Peak, and I have great satisfaction right now after climbing this one. We call this one of the harder ones. What would happen if one day I couldn't remember if I ever even climbed this mountain? I couldn't remember the difficulty, I can't remember the satisfaction I feel right now. That's what Alzheimer's does to people. And it's a devastating disease. I know this person.
I got some things that it's been when I was washed out. Had a day washed out.
Hello, this is Alan calling from the top of the world at the bottom of the world. This is calling from the summit of Mount Vinson in Antarctica. Hello, this is Alan calling from the summit of Aconcagua. We made it up here in... Hello, this is Alan calling from a very, very cold Denali, 14,000 foot Hello, this is Alan calling from the summit of Elbrus, Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in all of Europe. Hello, this is Alan calling from the roof of Africa, the summit of Kilimanjaro. Yes, hello, this is Alan calling from the summit of Carson's Pyramid. It's about 7 o'clock on Saturday. Hello, this is Alan calling from the summit of Mount Kosciuszko. Hello, this is Alan calling from the summit of Mount Everest. It's a sunrise here. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's about 5 a.m. We had a very, very fast trip up. Connie was incredible. I feel great. I want to dedicate this summit to my mom and to all the other Alzheimer's. We all love you. We miss you. Climb on. This is Alan.
Well, my father was James B. Arnett,
Oh, you're kidding.
and he passed away about 2 years ago.
James B. Arnett.
Yep, James B. Arnett. And my mother's name was Ida
Oh, come on.
Arnett.
No, come on.
Why do you say that?
Well, it's too ironic. Not true. I don't believe you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You must like that name.
I do. I love that name because that's my mother's name.
It's not.
It is.
I'll never know.
You know, deep down, you know.
Altyazı